The night was colder than usual, and snowflakes were falling slowly on the empty streets. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, but most people had already gone home to warmth and comfort. Near the old music academy, a young girl stood under a flickering streetlight, hugging herself tightly. Her coat was thin and torn at the sleeve. Her shoes soaked from walking through slush. She looked exhausted, like someone who had walked for miles without a destination. Her name was Lila. She had been walking since afternoon, trying to find somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere she wouldn't be chased away. She used to work at a small cafe, washing dishes and cleaning tables. It wasn't much, but it helped her pay for food and rent in a tiny shared room. Last week, the cafe closed suddenly, and her landlord told her to leave by the weekend. Now she had nothing. No money, no family, no roof over her head. As she passed the grand building with tall glass doors and golden lights, she stopped. It was the city's music academy. She remembered standing outside it once, long ago, listening to students practice through open windows. The sound of the piano always touched her heart. It reminded her of her mother, who used to hum softly while sewing clothes in their small apartment. Her mother's dream was for Lila to learn piano one day, but life had other plans. The guard by the door was locking up for the night when he saw her. He frowned. "Hey, girl, the building's closed. You can't stay here." She nodded quickly and stepped back, but her eyes looked longingly at the warm light inside. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please, I don't want to bother anyone, it's just so cold outside. Can I sit in the hall for a few minutes? Just until I stop shaking?" The man hesitated. He was used to turning away strangers, but something in her voice made him pause. She didn't sound like a beggar or a troublemaker. "Just someone tired and lost," he sighed, looking around to make sure no one else saw. "Fine, sit near the back door, don't touch anything, and leave quietly, all right?" Her face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, sir," she said softly, and stepped inside. The warmth hit her immediately, making her eyes sting with relief. The grand hall stretched before her, empty and echoing. The golden lights reflected off polished floors, and at the center of the stage sat a grand piano, shining like a jewel under the spotlight. Lila sat on the wooden bench near the wall, rubbing her hands together to warm them. The silence felt peaceful. She listened to the faint hum of the heaters and the creak of the old floor. For the first time in days, she wasn't outside freezing. She looked at the piano again, her heart beat faster. She had always dreamed of touching one, to feel the keys beneath her fingers, to see if she could still remember the melodies she used to imagine as a child. Her mother's face flashed in her memory, her soft smile, her quiet hums, her promise that music can warm even the coldest hearts. Lila blinked away tears. She knew she shouldn't touch it. The guard had told her to sit quietly, but her fingers itched with longing. It wasn't about showing off one night, it was about remembering who she once was before everything fell apart. She stood slowly and walked toward the piano, each step echoing softly. Her reflection shimmered on its glossy black surface. She reached out and gently touched one white key. The sound that came out was pure and delicate, like the first snowflake falling. She gasped quietly and pressed another, then another. The small sounds blended together, and soon, her trembling hands began to move on their own. It was clumsy at first, her fingers stiff from the cold, but as she played, the notes began to flow smoother. A simple tune, something she had made up as a child, filled the empty hall. The sound wrapped around her like a blanket. The sadness in her chest slowly turned into warmth. She closed her eyes, letting the music speak for her. Her hunger, her fear, her hope. She didn't know that behind the door upstairs, someone had returned. The director of the academy had forgotten his coat and was coming back to get it. He stopped mid-step, hearing the fragile melody echoing through the empty hall. The sound was full of emotion, not the perfect technique of a student, but the soul of someone who had lived and suffered. Lila kept playing, unaware of the man watching from the shadows. The music was all she had left, and in that cold night it became her shelter. The piano keys glistened under her tears as she whispered to herself, "Mama, I'm still playing." The sound carried softly into the night, a quiet miracle born from hunger, courage, and a heart that refused to freeze. The big hall was silent, except for the soft sound of the heater in the corner. Lila sat alone on the bench, her hands still warm from playing. She didn't know how long she had been lost in that moment. But for the first time in many nights, her heart felt alive. The golden glow from the chandeliers above made the piano shine like something from a dream. She looked around, making sure no one was coming. The guard was outside smoking a cigarette. Humming to himself, he had no idea that inside, the girl he let in had just poured her soul into the piano. Lila's breath came out in small clouds as she smiled faintly. It felt strange. She hadn't smiled in weeks. The music still echoed faintly in her head. Every key she touched had felt warm, real, kind. It was like the piano had listened to her pain and answered gently. For a moment, she forgot she was homeless. Hungry and lost in that moment, she was a musician, not a girl running from the cold. She stood and looked around the empty hall again. The chairs were lined neatly, the stage curtains half drawn, and the air smelled faintly of polish and dust. She whispered softly, "If only I could stay here forever." Her voice bounced back to her, sounding lonely but hopeful. At the far end of the hall, behind the red curtain, a small movement made her freeze, but it was only a curtain swaying slightly from the heater's air. She let out a shaky laugh. Her nerves were on edge, yet her heart still felt light. Her eyes returned to the piano. She walked around it, tracing her fingers along the wood. It was beautiful, old but cared for. The brand name carved in gold letters across the lid. Her fingers stopped near the keys. She wanted to play again, but fear stopped her. The guard had warned her not to touch anything, and she had already broken that rule once. Still, the silence felt too heavy, too lonely. Her fingers twitched again, and she sat down slowly. "Just one more," she whispered to herself. She pressed a single key, then another. Soon a soft melody filled the room again, this time slower, gentler, like a lullaby for herself. What she didn't know was that upstairs the director of the academy had returned for his forgotten coat. His name was Mr. Armand, an old man with gray hair and tired eyes. He was walking down the marble staircase when he stopped. The faint sound of the piano drifted toward him. It wasn't the sound of any student he knew. It was raw, emotional, almost fragile. He frowned slightly, thinking one of the students had sneaked in after hours. But when he reached the balcony overlooking the hall, he saw her. A thin girl, clothes shabby, hair messy, sitting at the grand piano with her eyes closed. He stood still, his hand on the railing, watching. The girl played like someone who had never been taught but had lived through every note. Her fingers weren't perfect, some keys slipped, but the emotion behind it was powerful. He could feel every tremble in her sound, like a heartbeat echoing through the hall for the first time in years. Mr. Armand felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had listened to hundreds of students, trained by the best teachers, but none had played like this. None had played with pain down below. Lila finished the melody with a soft sigh. Her hands rested on the keys, and she whispered thank you to no one. It was her small prayer to the piano, her only friend that night. Then a slow sound came. Clap, clap, clap. She turned sharply, her heart racing. The old man stepped out from the shadows, his eyes kind but serious. "I'm sorry," Lila said quickly, standing up in fear. "I didn't mean to. I was just cold. I wanted to sit." "I'm leaving now," but the director raised a hand gently. "Wait," he said softly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She froze, her mouth opening but no words coming out. "I didn't learn," she finally whispered. I listen sometimes when others play." Mr. Armand walked closer, each step echoing on the polished floor. He saw her shoes cracked and wet, her thin coat, her trembling fingers. His heart ached. "What's your name, child?" "Lila," she whispered, eyes lowered. "Lila," he repeated slowly as if memorizing it. "You have something rare." She looked up, confused. "I do?" He nodded. "Most people play with their hands, but you play with your soul." Tears filled her eyes at his words. She had never been praised for anything in her life. Not like this. She wanted to believe him, but her voice shook. I can't stay here, sir. The guard works for me," he said calmly. "And tonight you played for me." "Not for him." Her heart stopped. She didn't know what that meant, but it sounded like a door opening in her dark world. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Come back tomorrow morning," he said over his shoulder. "Tell the front desk you're here for an audition." Before she could speak, he was gone, leaving her standing in the warm golden light, her hands trembling. For a long moment, Lila stood frozen, staring at the piano. Then slowly, a small, Hopeful smile touched her lips. For the first time in months, she had something to look forward to. The hall that had saved her from the cold might just save her life too. Lila barely slept that night. She had found a corner behind a bakery's vent, where warm air drifted out and kept her from freezing. But her mind wouldn't rest. The memory of the piano keys stayed with her. The sound, the feeling, and most of all, the man's voice saying, "Come back tomorrow for an audition." Those words felt unreal, like a dream too fragile to touch. When the first light of morning brushed the rooftops, she stood up, brushed off her coat, and started walking toward the academy. Her shoes were still wet, her stomach empty, but her heart burned with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Every step echoed with questions. What if he didn't mean it? What if he forgot? What if they threw her out? Still, she kept walking. The academy gate stood tall and silent. Students in neat uniforms entered with laughter and chatter, carrying instruments and coffee cups. Lila stood by the gate, her breath clouding in the cold air. The guard from last night looked at her with surprise. "You again?" He said, I was told to come," she said softly. "The director, he said I should." The man frowned, about to argue, but then the receptionist inside waved her in. "Mr. Armand left word," she said, her tone polite but curious. "Follow me." Lila followed her through shining hallways filled with framed pictures of famous musicians. The air smelled faintly of polish and music paper. Her heart pounded faster with every step. When they reached the small practice room, the receptionist smiled faintly. "Wait here. The director will see you soon." The door closed, and Lila looked around. The room was small but perfect. A grand piano sat in the middle, sunlight falling across its surface like a spotlight. She could see her reflection on the polished lid, tired eyes, messy hair, worn clothes. For a moment she felt small again, like she didn't belong here. Her fingers brushed over the keys. She whispered to herself, "Just breathe." Her hands trembled as she remembered her mother's voice. "Music is like prayer, Lila. It doesn't matter where you are. It just matters that you feel it." The door opened quietly. Mr. Armand stepped in holding a cup of coffee. "You came," he said with a small smile. "Yes, sir," she said quickly, standing up. "You said, I remember," he interrupted kindly. "No need to be nervous, just play something for me." "Anything you like," Lila nodded, sitting down carefully. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were shaky. Her nerves betrayed her, but as she continued, the sound grew stronger, richer. She played the same melody from last night and the one born from her loneliness, but this time, it was clearer, filled with purpose. The music rose and fell like a story being told without words. Mr. Armand didn't move, he just listened. Watching her face change with every chord, he saw her pain, her hope, her fire. The way her hands trembled yet refused to stop. The room seemed to grow warmer as she played. When she reached the last note, the silence that followed was deep. Lila looked up, breathing hard. "I'm sorry if it wasn't good enough," she whispered. Mr. Armand shook his head slowly. "Not good enough?" he said softly. "Lila, that was beautiful." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I've heard countless students," he continued. "But you play with something I can't teach. You play like someone who's lived every note." Tears stung her eyes. She bit her lip, not wanting to cry. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. I just wanted to play again." He smiled gently. "Tell me, do you know how to read music?" She shook her head, embarrassed. "No, sir, I never learned." "I only listen and remember." Mr. Armand nodded. "Then we'll start from there," he said. "If you're willing to learn, I'll teach you. But there's one rule. No more sleeping on the streets." Her eyes widened. "You know?" He sighed. "You're not the first student I've helped, Lila, but you might be the one who deserves it most." She covered her mouth, her body shaking with silent sobs. He waited, letting her cry. When she looked up again, her tears had turned into a trembling smile. "So, I can really stay?" she asked, her voice small. He nodded. "You can. We'll arrange a dorm room, meals and lessons, but in return, you must practice every day." Her eyes sparkled through the tears. "I will, sir. I promise." Mr. Armand placed a hand on the piano lid and said quietly, "This piano chose you, Lila. Don't waste the gift it gave you." As he walked out, she sat there in silence, her heart racing. She pressed her hands over her chest, feeling it beat faster. She looked at the piano again and whispered, I won't waste it, I promise. Then she began to play again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The room filled with her song, one of gratitude, one of rebirth, one that would soon echo far beyond that small hall. The news spread fast through the academy. By noon, everyone had heard that the director had invited a strange girl, a girl with no uniform, no past and no money, to play the grand piano. Some whispered she was a runaway. Others said she was a prodigy from the streets. Whatever the story, every student was curious. They wanted to see what made the old director so interested. Meanwhile, Lila sat in the small practice room. Unaware of the rumors, her fingers hovered above the keys, repeating scales just as Mr. Armand had shown her that morning. The sound of music surrounded her, faint melodies drifting from other rooms. But hers was different, untrained yet alive. The piano wasn't just an instrument to her, it was a voice, her way of surviving the silence of her life. Mr. Armand entered quietly, a notebook in hand. "You've been practicing all morning?" he asked with a faint smile. She nodded shyly. "I don't want to forget how it feels, sir." "You won't," he said. "Your hands remember more than you think." He watched as she continued to play. Her brows furrowed in focus, her touch was soft, uncertain, but every note carried emotion. The mistakes didn't bother him. They made the song human. Outside, 2 senior students peeked through the small glass window. One of them snorted. "She doesn't even know proper fingering," the other whispered. "Yeah, but listen. Doesn't that sound different somehow?" Inside, Lila didn't notice them. She was lost in the rhythm. Each key she pressed felt like a memory returning. Her world shrank to the sound of hammers striking strings. Mr. Armand walked closer, gently placing a small notebook on the piano. "From now on," he said, "you'll start learning how to read music. It's a new language. But I think you'll understand it quickly." She looked at the pages, strange circles and lines she couldn't make sense of. "It looks hard," she said quietly. He chuckled. So did the piano once. That afternoon, he left her alone again, but she didn't stop. Even when her fingers ached and her stomach growled, she played, repeating simple melodies over and over. When she hit a wrong note, she frowned, corrected it, and started again. Later, as the hallways grew quiet, Lila stretched her arms and stood. Her reflection in the piano lid looked different, not the same lost girl who had walked in days ago. Now there was something new in her eyes, something bright and alive. She wandered down the corridor, passing portraits of famous pianists. Her gaze landed on one near the end, a young woman with kind eyes. The plaque read, "Elena Armand, pianist, daughter of director Armand." Lila's breath caught. She didn't know he had a daughter. Mr. Armand appeared behind her, his expression unreadable. "That was my daughter," he said softly. "She played in this very hall once." Lila turned, unsure what to say. "She must have been amazing." "She was," he said quietly. "But she passed away in an accident 5 years ago." Lila's heart sank. "I'm so sorry," she said. He nodded, looking at the portrait for a long moment. "She used to say music wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. I lost that truth for a long time." He turned to Lila. "Until last night." Her eyes widened. "You mean when I—" He nodded slowly. "When you played? I remembered why I built this academy. It wasn't for fame. It was for people like you. People who play because they need to." Tears filled her eyes again. She didn't know what to say. The director's voice softened. "That's why I'm giving you a chance. But remember, talent alone isn't enough. You must have discipline. You must fight for every note." "I will," she said firmly. "I promise." The old man smiled faintly. "Good, then be ready tomorrow. You'll perform for the teachers. They'll decide if you can stay permanently." Her breath caught. "Tomorrow?" she whispered, panic flashing in her eyes. "Yes," he said. "Trust yourself. Play like you did that night. Play with your heart." When he left, Lila leaned against the wall, her hands trembling. The thought of performing in front of everyone terrified her. But deep down, a quiet fire burned. She remembered the cold streets, the hunger, the loneliness, and how the piano had saved her that night. She returned to the practice room once more. The building was empty, the halls dark. She lit the small lamp by the piano and sat down. Her reflection stared back at her, uncertain but brave. She began to play the melody that had brought her there. The same tune she had played when she was freezing in the hall, but this time it sounded stronger. Her fear melted into determination. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and endless. Inside, her music rose and filled the air, a song of hope, of rebirth, of a girl who once had nothing, and now had a chance, and somewhere in the dark hallway, Mr. Armand listened quietly once more, his hand pressed to his chest, whispering, "Elena, I think you'd be proud." The next morning, the academy buzzed with excitement. Posters for the upcoming winter recital hung across the halls. But that wasn't what people were whispering about. Every student, from the youngest to the most senior, was talking about the mysterious girl from the streets, the one who was going to play for the teachers today. Some called her lucky, others called her foolish. "She won't last 10 seconds, one voice said in the hallway. "She probably doesn't even know what a sonata is." Inside the small practice room, Lila sat in front of the piano, her heart pounding. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried to calm herself. The sunlight coming through the window painted golden stripes across the keys. She stared at them, remembering the cold night she first touched them, remembering how the piano had felt like home. Mr. Armand entered quietly, holding a small piece of paper. "They're ready for you," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried warmth and pride. "I know you're nervous, Lila, but don't think about them. Think about the music. Think about that night when it was just you and the piano." She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I'll do my best." "Do your best." He smiled gently. "No, Lila, be your best." He led her down the corridor to the main concert hall, the same hall where she had once begged to stay for warmth. Now she was walking through its doors as a performer, not a stranger. The tall wooden doors opened, and she saw them. A line of teachers sitting near the stage, clipboards in hand, and dozens of curious students filling the seats behind them. The whispers stopped as she entered. "Who's that?" "She's so young." "Is that the girl the director found outside?" Their voices buzzed around her, but she tried to shut them out. Her eyes went straight to the grand piano under the stage lights. It was the same one, the same instrument that had saved her. Mr. Armand gave her a reassuring nod from the side. "Begin whenever you're ready," he said softly. Lila sat down. Her hands shaking slightly, she took a slow breath, closed her eyes, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she couldn't hear anything but her heartbeat. Then she began. The first notes were soft, fragile, like a whisper. The teachers leaned forward slightly, expecting a child's random attempt. But as the melody grew, the hall began to change. The air seemed to fill with warmth. Each note carried a story of the cold streets, the hunger, the longing, and the tiny sparks of hope that had kept her alive. The audience went quiet. Even the students who had laughed now sat frozen. Her music wasn't perfect. A few notes slipped. Her rhythm wavered. But it didn't matter. What she gave them wasn't performance. It was truth. Mr. Armand closed his eyes, remembering his daughter, remembering how she had once said, "The purest music comes from pain that's been healed." When Lila reached the final part of her song, she slowed down. Her hands moved gracefully, her face calm. When the last note faded into silence, the hall remained still for a long moment. Then, one teacher clapped, followed by another, and soon the entire room erupted in applause. Lila looked up in disbelief, her eyes filled with tears. The sound of clapping echoed like thunder. Mr. Armand stepped forward, smiling proudly. "That," he said, turning to the teachers, "is what I call music." One of the professors, a stern woman with sharp glasses, stood and said, "Director, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it." "That girl plays straight from her soul," the students whispered again. But this time there was no mockery, only awe. Lila stood slowly, her hands shaking. "Thank you," she whispered to the crowd. Though her voice was barely audible, Mr. Armand placed a hand on her shoulder. "Congratulations, Lila," he said warmly. "You've earned your place here." She blinked. "You mean, I can stay?" He nodded. "Not just stay. You're now a scholarship student. The academy will cover everything." Food, housing, lessons, everything you need to become who you're meant to be. Her legs nearly gave out. Sir, he raised a hand, smiling. Don't thank me, child. Thank the music. It found you. The crowd continued to clap, and some students even stood. Leela bowed her head, tears falling freely. She looked at the piano one more time and whispered softly, Thank you. That evening she moved into her new dorm room, small but warm, with a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the snowy street. She unpacked the only thing she owned, a small photo of her mother worn and creased. She placed it on the desk beside her pillow and whispered, Mama, I did it. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and endless. Inside, a light burned in the window of the academy, where a once homeless girl had found her second chance, and somewhere down the hall the grand piano waited for her next song. Shining in the golden glow of the future, days turned into weeks, and soon the academy no longer whispered about the homeless girl. They now whispered about the girl with the golden touch. Leila had become a quiet legend in the halls. Her name spread from classroom to classroom, not because she was perfect, but because every time she played, people felt something deep inside, something real, something they couldn't explain. But success came with new challenges. While some students admired her, others grew jealous. They had spent years studying theory, mastering techniques. Yet this new girl, who couldn't even read music a month ago, now played like she'd been born on the keys. One morning, as Leila entered the main hall, two students blocked her path. One of them, a tall, confident boy named Vincent, crossed his arms. So, street girl, he said with a smirk. Enjoying your free ride? Leila froze, clutching her music notebook to her chest. I'm just going to practice, she said quietly, trying to pass. But the other student, a red-haired girl named Claire, sneered. Practice? Please. You don't even belong here. The director only took you in because he pities you. Lila's heart tightened. She didn't respond. She had faced worse. Hunger, cold, nights under the open sky. But their words still hurt. She lowered her head and walked away. Their laughter followed her down the hall. That afternoon, during class, she sat silently at the back. Mr. Armand noticed her pale face and distant eyes. When everyone left, he called her over. Leila, what's troubling you? She hesitated. I think some of the students don't like me, sir. He nodded slowly. Jealousy is the tax talent pays, my dear. But you must remember, you're not here to prove them wrong. You're here to prove yourself right. She looked up, his words sinking deep. Yes, sir, she said softly. Later that evening, the academy's main hall filled again. Not for a concert, but for practice sessions. The winter recital was only 2 weeks away, and Leila had been given the impossible. She was to play the solo opening piece, the same one once performed by Mr. Armand's daughter, Elena. The responsibility scared her more than anything. Every note of that piece carried history, love, and grief. But she wanted to honor it. To honor Elena, to honor the piano, and to honor the man who had believed in her when no one else did. As she practiced late into the night, her fingers trembling from exhaustion, she made mistake after mistake. Tears filled her eyes. I can't do it, she whispered to herself. I'll never be good enough. She didn't notice Mr. Armand standing in the doorway. Watching her silently, when she stopped playing and buried her face in her hands, he finally spoke. Do you know what my daughter used to say when she couldn't get a song right? Leila jumped, wiping her eyes quickly. Sir, I didn't see you. He smiled gently. She used to say music doesn't ask for perfection, it only asks for honesty. Leila looked down, whispering, But I keep failing. I can't play like her. He walked closer, his voice calm and kind. You're not supposed to. Leila, you're supposed to play like you. Those words stayed with her. They burned in her heart as she sat again, closed her eyes, and began to play. This time, she didn't think about technique or notes. She thought about her mother, about sleeping on cold streets, About the night she first touched the piano, the melody that came out was different, softer, rawer, but breathtakingly beautiful. Mr. Armand listened, his eyes shining. "Yes," he whispered. "That's it. That's your sound." The next morning, the academy buzzed again. The teachers were preparing for the recital and students were rehearsing everywhere. Lila carried her notebook and hurried to the stage. Her mind still echoed with the director's words, "Play like you." When she entered the hall, Vincent and Claire were there again. They watched her smirking. "So, the charity girl's opening the recital," Vincent said. "Let's see if she can even make it through the first movement." Lila didn't answer. She just smiled faintly and walked past them. Her silence hurt them more than any reply could. That night she stayed in the practice room again, alone. The moonlight streamed through the window, reflecting off the piano keys. She placed her fingers gently on the instrument and began to play. Her music floated through the empty halls, rising like a prayer. She didn't notice that students passing by stopped to listen. One by one, they stood outside, silent, mesmerized. Even Vincent and Claire stood frozen at the door, their pride melting into awe. They had mocked her, but now as the melody flowed, they understood. She wasn't playing for fame or applause. She was playing because music was her way of breathing. When the last note faded, she looked up, startled to see them all there. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one student whispered, "She doesn't play like us, she plays like she means it." Lila smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. In that moment, she realized something. Music had done what hunger, fear, and loneliness never could. It had made her truly seen, and far down the corridor, Mr. Armand smiled to himself, whispering, "Yes, Elena, she's ready." The night of the winter recital arrived like a dream wrapped in snow. The academy glowed under silver lights. Carriages and cars lined up outside, and music lovers from all over the city gathered to watch the best students perform. The air was full of perfume, chatter, and the soft rustle of velvet coats inside. The grand hall shimmered with chandeliers and gold curtains. Backstage, Lila stood in a simple white dress that one of the teachers had lent her. Her hands trembled as she held the sheet music. Even though she didn't really need it anymore, the notes were already printed inside her heart. Her breath came fast, not from fear of playing, but from the weight of what this night meant a few months ago. She was freezing outside this same building, begging for warmth, and now she was about to open the biggest performance of the season. From behind the curtains, she could hear the audience taking their seats. The murmurs growing louder. The teachers sat in the front rows, and in the center seat, Mr. Armand watched quietly, his eyes calm but proud. Beside him was an empty chair with a white rose, a tradition the academy kept every year in memory of his late daughter. "Elena," a stagehand whispered. "You're on in 2 minutes," Lila nodded, whispering softly to herself. "You can do this, just play like you always do. Play from your heart." She took one last breath and stepped out. The crowd went silent. The lights dimmed except for the single golden spotlight on her. For a moment she stood still, her heart pounding like a drum. Then she sat down at the piano, her reflection gleaming on its black surface. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She thought of everything, her mother's lullabies, the cold nights, Mr. Armand's kindness, and the words he told her, "Play like you." She smiled faintly. Then with a deep breath she began. The first note floated through the air like a whisper of wind, soft and fragile. The melody that followed was not the exact one written on the sheet. It was hers, a mix of Elena's composition and Lila's soul, raw and beautiful. It started gently, rising and falling like waves, then grew stronger, bolder, filling the entire hall with warmth. People leaned forward in their seats. Some closed their eyes, letting the music pull them into memories they had long forgotten. Lila played as if she wasn't on stage but in a dream, her body still, her soul speaking through her hands up in the balcony. A young reporter whispered to her companion, "Who is she?" "I've never heard a sound like that," the other replied softly. "They say she was found outside the school, homeless." "Impossible," the reporter said, eyes wide. "That's not a homeless girl. That's an angel playing." The melody climbed higher, shimmering like light on glass, then it fell again, gentle and aching. Lila's heart raced as tears welled in her eyes. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing to thank the world for giving her another chance. When the final note rang out, it hung in the air for what felt like forever. Then silence, deep and complete, like the breath before dawn, and then the applause began. Soft at first, then louder until it became thunder. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even shouted her name. Lila, Lila. She sat frozen, her hand still on the keys, her chest heaving. She looked out at the sea of faces and lights, tears spilling freely now. Mr. Armand stood as well, his hands together, but his eyes full of emotion he couldn't hide. For him, it wasn't just pride, it was healing. He looked at the empty chair beside him, the one with the white rose, and whispered softly. She heard it, Elena. I know she did, backstage. When Lila finally came off the stage, everyone wanted to speak to her. Teachers praised her, students hugged her. Even Vincent and Claire, the two who once mocked her, stood in silence. You were amazing, Claire said quietly. I'm sorry for how we treated you. Lila smiled through tears. It's okay, I understand, Vincent nodded, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. You reminded us what real music is, she laughed softly. The sound light and warm. Thank you. Mr. Armand entered the room then, everyone stepping aside as he approached. Well done, Lila, he said, his voice steady but his eyes glistening. You didn't just play. You spoke. And the whole world listened. Lila looked up at him. Thank you for believing in me, sir. He smiled. I didn't just believe in you, Lila. I remembered something I'd forgotten. Why music exists at all. She tilted her head. Why? He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Because music reminds us that even broken hearts can create something beautiful. Tears filled her eyes again. She nodded. Then I'll keep playing, sir. I'll never stop. Good, he said softly. Because tonight, you didn't just perform. You became a musician. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and steady. But inside the academy, warmth filled every corner. And as the lights dimmed and the audience slowly left, the echo of Lila's final note lingered in the air. A promise, a memory, and the sound of a new beginning. Months passed after the winter recital. Yet people in the city still spoke about the girl who made the piano cry. Lila's name had become a quiet legend. Music teachers quoted her performance to their students, and newspapers called her the miracle from the streets, but to Lila, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she finally belonged somewhere in the academy, among music, among people who no longer saw her as a stranger. Each morning she woke early to practice in the same grand hall where she had once begged to stay warm. The smell of wood polish, the soft echo of her footsteps. It all felt like home now. She often paused at the piano, touching the keys lightly and whispering, "Thank you," before beginning her lessons. Mr. Armand watched her progress with quiet pride. He rarely interrupted her playing now, preferring to stand in the shadows of the doorway. Listening, she had grown into her sound. Her once uncertain touch had become confident yet gentle. Every note she played carried truth. Not perfection, but feeling. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, he said, "Lila, I have something to tell you." She stopped, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Yes, sir?" "There's a letter for you," he said, handing her an envelope with the academy seal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was an invitation to perform at the National Young Pianists Gala, the most prestigious event in the country. Her mouth fell open. "Sir, is this real?" He smiled softly. "It's very real. They heard about your recital, and they want you to represent the academy." Her heart raced. "But I'm not ready for that. I'm just—" He raised a hand gently. "You're more than ready, Lila. You've already proven that music doesn't come from privilege. It comes from courage." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her dorm room, staring at the snowflakes falling outside, remembering the night she first entered this place. Cold, lost, and desperate. How strange that the same snow now looked beautiful instead of cruel. She whispered to herself, "If Mama could see me now." The day of the gala came quickly. The concert hall was far larger than the academy's, filled with hundreds of guests, golden chandeliers, and cameras flashing everywhere. Lila's heart thumped as she stood backstage in a simple blue dress, the same one she wore to every performance since she couldn't afford another. Other young pianists walked past her, confident, dressed in silk, laughing about sponsors and expensive lessons. But Lila wasn't intimidated anymore. She had faced hunger and loneliness. She had played for survival, not applause, and that kind of strength couldn't be taught. When her turn came, she stepped onto the massive stage. Her breath caught for a moment as the lights hit her face. Then she sat down, remembering Mr. Armand's words. Play like you. The piece she chose wasn't one of the grand concert pieces. It was her own. The melody she had first played that cold night when she had nothing but hope. As her fingers touched the keys, a hush fell over the room. The music began like a whisper, gentle and trembling. Then it grew layer by layer, into something powerful. Her story poured out through the piano. Every cold night, every tear, every kind word. It wasn't just music anymore. It was her life told in sound. When she finished, the silence that followed was deep and reverent. Then the applause came. Not polite, but thunderous. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. Lila stood and bowed, her eyes shining. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she smiled. The calm smile of someone who had finally found peace backstage. Mr. Armand was waiting, tears in his eyes. You did it, he said softly. You didn't just play. You told the world who you are. She hugged him tightly, whispering, thank you for believing in me. Sir? He shook his head gently. No, Lila. Thank you for reminding me why I believed in music. A week later, the Academy held a ceremony to honor her. She was given the Elena Armand Award for Artistic Truth, the same award once named after the director's daughter. Lila could barely speak through her tears as she accepted it. I came here just looking for warmth, she said softly, her voice trembling. But I found something much bigger. I found family, I found music. I found myself. The hall erupted in applause once more. That night, after everyone left, Lila returned to the empty concert hall. The lights were dim, and the grand piano sat quietly under the moonlight. She walked up to it, touched its keys, and began to play one last song. Not for the audience, not for applause, but for her mother, for Elena, and for the lonely girl she once was. Outside, snow fell again, just like that first night. But now, inside the warm glow of the Academy, the girl who once froze in the dark had become the light herself, and as her music drifted into the night, soft and eternal, it seemed to whisper one final truth, that sometimes the coldest nights create the brightest souls.